Okay, welcome everyone to our IFCYBER seminar. The seminar topic is on splitting to the extreme, a mixed method to explain how extreme opinions infiltrate online discussions. Our speaker is Dr. Marian-Andrei Rizoiu. I'll briefly introduce our presenter. So Dr. Marian is a senior lecturer in the behavior data science in UTS. In UTS, he leads a behavior data science group. He is the computer scientist interested in addressing questions where human online behavior and machine learning cross over. He's currently leading the department. Of Home Affairs with a $1 million initiative to fight online misinformation. His research has made several key contributions to the online popularity prediction, real-time tracking and countering disinformation campaigns, and understanding shortages and mismatches in labor markets. Dr. Marian's research is funded by the Department of Home Affairs, Facebook Research, and DST, and published in most selective venues, including PNAS, IFCYBER, CICAM, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's welcome Dr. Andrei to give us this talk. Thank you. Over to you.
All right, thank you so much for having me. And so thanks both to our online participants. We're at 14 and growing. This is good. Thanks for the people who are enduring the rain and the early hour to be here in person. It's really a pleasure to be here, and an honor. Okay, so thanks for the great introduction. I'm Marian-Andrei Rizoiu. I am within the Data Science Institute at the University of Technology, Sydney. I lead there the Behavioral Data Science Lab. After, obviously, like all academics, I did the slides of this talk late last night, and I realized that you guys may want a bit more than just me telling you about the paper, but you may want to hear a bit more about the bigger context. So I sort of added to the title "Breaking Free of the Arms Race," which doesn't help at all understand what this is about, but you're gonna get it in just 1 second. Before I get there, just a little bit of context of who I am. So, because you guys are at UNSW, you probably don't know about UTS. We know what UTS about UNSW. It's this type of, but believe me, I'm used to it. I'm used to it. I was in Canberra before, and people in Canberra know about Sydney. People in Sydney don't necessarily know about Canberra. So UTS is the university with the ugly tower, just in case you don't know. They built a beautiful glass building next to it, UTS Central, really modern. If you ask me, the beauty of the new building only emphasizes the ugliness of the old building. Either way, fun fact, if you have to remember one thing from this presentation, the tower has been voted for a couple of years already in a row as Sydney's ugliest building. So, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Next, I've been with UTS. I'm a senior lecturer at UTS, been there for about 3 years and a bit now. I'm working on building a research group, which is currently mainly, there's 2 postdocs that are working on this Home Affairs initiative that you just heard about, but also a couple of PhD students, some master's students. And what really unifies our work is around information diffusion. So by training, I'm a computer engineer, which then turned to the dark force and went to machine learning and data science. And what I really do is basically I build models, mathematical models. Let me put this in a nutshell. Whenever you do any sort of actions online, you retweet a tweet, you share a piece of content, you write a message to your friends, you do what is called an atomic action. Those atomic actions are only visible to the people right around you in your environment, so they are not visible outside. However, when you take them collectively, when you take them in aggregate measures, you start getting these collective level measures such as popularity, virality, what makes it popular, what doesn't, why particular types of content catch on and others don't. What I do for a living is I build the simplest mathematical models which act at the level of the individual, and then when taken in aggregate, explain the measures we see at the collective level. So what happens is that you can build measures at this level, however, you can fit them at the collective level. And then you can go back and you can do all kinds of predictions and interpretations at the individual level. So we do things like information diffusion, but also it can be used for epidemic spreading or behavioral modeling. What I've been applying this recently is in working around social bots detection and understanding all types of behavior online, Russian trolls. But really, what really motivates my research is around understanding racism, hate speech, problematic speech in general, all kind of bad types of problematic interactions in the online environment, and also looking at misinformation and disinformation. I still put fact and fake, but fake news is yesterday's term. We don't call that anymore. So I'm working with a range of collaborators and a range of funders. Most recently, I've been working with the Department of Home Affairs, which awarded UTS and University of California, Berkeley, a large grant to look at the information integrity, fight misinformation within the Australia. So this is building an Australian domestic solution to misinformation and conspiracy theories. I've been working under the funding of Department of Defense, the SDG, for building detection of disinformation campaigns. There's been a Facebook-funded project on understanding hate speech propagation on social media, and then there's a range of other smaller projects. So this is the kind of space where I'm trying to positioning the research of the group. So really what I'm going to be telling you about today are two things. One is the grant vision of an end-to-end solution to information disorder. Big name, big promises, but the idea is to show you kind of the rough thinking that I have, and I'm calling this breaking free of the arms race. And then I'm going to be showing you, I'm going to zoom in on a piece of research that was published earlier this year in ICWSM, from International Conference of Web and Social Media, about slipping to the extremes. And this one is particularly interesting because this work has been done with in collaboration with social scientists and literature scientists in order to develop a system that detects problematic speech. Okay, so I stole this slide straight from First Draft. First Draft was the international think tank based in UK, which had an accent on journalism, but the idea was to they were looking at countering online misinformation. First Draft is no longer, because they ran out of funding and has been dissoluted and being absorbed, but they built a set of very good resources. And they denominated information disorder into 7 types of problematic information. It goes from satire and parody, which is just for fun, but it can cause problems. It moves into misleading content, false connections, false context, imposter content, and goes all the way to manipulation and fabricated content. These are dimensions of information disorder, starting from the least harmful all the way to the most harmful. So there's quite a range of how information can be wrong. And in there, this is where we are zooming a bit in. We are zooming into problematic speech, which was defined in 2017 by Jack as any sort of online interaction, speech, and artifacts that are inaccurate, misleading, inappropriately attributed, or altogether fabricated. So most of these definitions actually come from journalism and linguistics. They are not necessarily in computer science. Operationalizing them in computer science sometimes can be quite a bit tricky. So what we look in problematic speech is misinformation, disinformation, to which we add hate speech. Okay, again, a bit of background. We talk a lot about mis and disinformation. A lot of people, including myself, sometimes use them interchangeably. This is not correct. It's not true. There's a big difference between the two. You have on the dark bubble the falseness of a piece of information. In the red bubble, you have the intention to harm. So misinformation is unintentional usage of false information. This is, my grandma had a lot of misinformation. They used to sit with her friends in front of their courtyard and talk all this gossip about things which are not true. But there was no harm in there. There was no intent. It was simply wrong. On the other hand, you have malinformation all the way on the other spectrum. Malinformation is not necessarily false, but is being used deliberately to harm. It can be as easy as, for example, publishing private information or explicit content. It's not necessarily fake, but it's intended to harm. Disinformation is right in the middle of the two. It is usually false content with an intent to harm. The main difference between misinformation and disinformation is the intent. of spreading that information. That's the very difficult bit. And this is why it's problematic. Conspiracy theories are misinformation. When you weaponize them to get people on the street to march, and when you burn down 5G towers, that becomes disinformation. Okay, so here's the thing. I call this the Red Queen effect, and you may remember in Alice in Wonderland, at some point the Red Queen tells Alice, now here, you see, all it takes is all the running you can do just to keep up in the same place. If you want to go anywhere, you need to run twice as fast. What this basically refers is the arms race between content-based detectors and content generators. The idea is that content-based detectors are sensitive to adversarial training attacks. And no matter how good is the detector that I'm building for, say, misinformation or a particular type of narrative, the attackers, all they need to do is use an adversarial training setup and just beat my detector straight away with minimum effort. Because this is not an equal amount of effort that is invested into building the detector and the adversarial training, breaking the detector with an adversarial training, it means that I can never win. So that's what I call the arms race. How do we break free of the arms race? The solution, this is the idea, and this is honestly probably the most important slide in the presentation. The idea is build social sensors. Don't look at the content, look at how people react to the content. Because the content is developed and is built in such a way to elicit a particular reaction from the people. So why look at the content then, where we can use humans as social sensors and we can see how they react to the content. The fun thing about it is that the reaction of the system cannot be faked because that's the intended outcome and also is not controlled. It also means that we can build early detection systems. We can look at the spread patterns of types of content, and we can within the user population, and even better, we can distinguish types of content based solely on how the social systems consume them. It looks a bit like science fiction, but we have research that proves it, and I'm going to take you really quickly through some of it right now. So this is basically sort of a roadmap that I'm following within the different grants and approaches that I've been showing you earlier. I'm calling it influence operation space. The idea is to have a couple of steps: monitoring, detecting, predicting, and mitigating. And the idea here is in monitoring means building solutions that monitor discussions on the online social media and on particular topics. So you have broad topics of interest, vaccines or climate change, and you listen to all the social media discussions that happen around those key topics. The idea is to be able to have these reactions, these models and detectors running always in the background, being able to quickly flag when operations or when misinformation starts spreading based on the reaction of the systems that you are monitoring anyway. This puts like a little red flag saying, look here, something may be happening. So it really demands the attention of the operator. The next step is predicting. Because the models that we are deploying are generative in nature, it means that you can run them forward and you can predict the likely outcome of your operation. The last step is obviously mitigation, which is probably the one which is a bit most blue sky at the moment. There's a couple of options. You can do what is called pre-bunk. You can do debunking. You can do pre-bunking. You can do negative interventions when you suspend users. You can do positive interventions where you draw the attention somewhere else. There's a number of options that can be put forward. So really driving you forward for some of the solutions. For the monitoring part, we have already developed a tool. This is a prototype that is working, where you can configure a set of keywords on the left, defining the topics that you are interested in following. It captures information now for free data sources, Twitter, Facebook, and traditional news media, because there's always an intertwining, and this captures information. The operator can also label the information with opinions and themes. The second part in the monitoring is the detection part, when we detect particular types of opinion, and this is what I'm going to be talking to you about today, slipping to the extremes, and we build this human in the loop approach. I'm not going to insist on this. I'm going to spend a bit of time later on in the presentation about it. The third bit, and this is about the modeling. We can actually we can use the modeling as a point process. And by the way, I'm talking about modeling. My tool, my poison of choice is the Hawk's point processes, which is a self-exciting type of self-exciting flavor of point processes, random processes. And it turns out that if we build the information spread, the information diffusion as Hawk's point processes, and we do it aggregate at the level of publishers, what happens is that we can build embeddings from mixture models, and we can construct publisher embeddings. So the idea is we look at how content from specific publishers spreads. We build numerical embeddings based solely on the Hawk's point process, and what we obtain is results like this. What you have here in the red is reputable news sources, places things like ABC, Sydney Morning Herald, Cricket. On the black, you have controversial news. You have Breitbart, you have RT, Twitchy, Politicus, Red State. When you look at, without ever reading a single word of the articles themselves, but simply looking how they are spread on Twitter, you build numerical embeddings, which brings the types of the publishers as being separable. So you can build now classifiers, and you can predict the type of publisher looking solely on how their content is being consumed online. Similarly, we can look. Oh yes, and this is the modeling is already built into Evently, which is a tool and a package that we have released for doing all this modeling, and it's an R tool, installable, really easy to use. The second bit is identifying influence and inauthenticity, so building social bots, building detectors for social bots and influence. What you have here is a set of users from discussions in COVID. Each dot is a user. The color shows you the influence, lighter influence, so lower influence, higher influence, and the shape tells you if it's an organic user or a social bot, an automated system. What you observe is that most bots don't have any influence, and we knew this from literature. We know that most bots are useless. However, some bots yield considerable amount of influence. How you can deploy such a system is, again, in a monitoring approach, where you detect this and you can concentrate your attention on the activity of these individuals here, which are most likely to cause harm through their influence. Again, this is implemented in a package called BirdSpotter, again, available for download and use, that takes social media data in raw form on one end and takes it all the way to analysis such as this. Okay, that was sort of the big intro about where I'm placing my research. Now, what I'm going to do in the second part, I'm going to zoom into one particular piece of work, and I've been looking at how did we leverage an interdisciplinary team to build a problematic opinion detector. And I'm going to show you how we did this. And I'm calling it stripping to the extreme, and you're going to see that in a second. This was published, as I said, in ICWSM this year. The conference took place in Atlanta, virtually for me. Cool. Whenever we're looking at problematic speech, the first thing we realize is that there's a huge gap in the types of methods that you can deploy. You can do computational and quantitative approaches, what we computer scientists would do, and you can do things like large-scale monitoring of social media data, and I'm guilty of doing some of that. You can identify platforms and networks and users that contribute to the infodemic via networked approaches, and we have a number of works in that space, particularly coming from our friends at the Digital Observatory, DMRC in QUT. And then you can do things like predicting information via models like the ones I described. However, not everyone does it like that. When you look into the social sciences, they will be applying qualitative and ethnographic approaches. That means that they're going to sit down, they're going to read the blogs, they're going to make connections, they're going to follow the users. Sometimes they're going to interact with the users. And these will allow to inform how information is shared and how opinions are formed. Notice always the how, not the what, not the how much, but the how, or why opinions and information sources scale. So they tend to approach this, they tend to address these kind of problems. Now, each of these have issues. For example, we can do large scale, we usually lack precision. These guys, they are very precise, but they lack representativity. simply because they look at one area of the information space, but they can't claim that they've seen everything that happens. So how do we marry the two? This is the question. How do we build scalable solutions with the principles of the social scientists and their precision? So our research questions for this work was, of course, the first one, how can we leverage both types of analysis, but also can we accelerate qualitative research? Because they tend to be very, very, very slow. They do a lot of manual work. Can we accelerate it in any way? And finally, we wanted to understand and build hypotheses of how problematic opinions infiltrate the discourse, the public discourse. Those are all three questions. The team itself was interdisciplinary, and this research was funded by a Facebook project. And we actually had communication scientists from the Faculty of Arts and Social Science within UTS. We had a literature scientist and 2 computer scientists. And I think that half of the difficulty of building this research was making the team work. But you can ask me in the questions why that's difficult. But we got it working, and this is what we came up with. This is a system made out of 3 parts. A qualitative study, which was done purely by the qualitative researchers, which started with data from social media platforms. They sat down and they annotated the data and they plugged in select excerpts of text with their annotation into a Wikibase knowledge base that we installed. There is the unlabeled data collection. After they've done this, they provided a set of keywords, and we collected data at scale. And we went onto these 3 platforms, we used their APIs, and we just collected millions of data points. And finally, we annotated the whole thing using a machine learning classifier, which we augmented the data set using a human in the loop approach. This is funny because when my social scientists asked me, how does the system work? I told them it's a reverse augmentation. It's not the human that uses the machine, it's the machine that uses the human. It's a machine with human parts. Why? Because the AI system selects what data to be annotated. The human annotates them. We retrain the classifier. The machine selects other examples. The machine tells the human what to do. I found that funny. They didn't like it. Let me take this part in detail. The qualitative study. We started with 4 topics: Australian bushfires, climate change, COVID, and vaccination. Really big topics at the beginning of 2020. Our data spans from December 2019 to January 2021. And they looked at things what they called internet places. Even vocabulary is completely different from ours. Their internet places were news stories, Facebook pages, and public groups. They tracked links across pages. So they looked at how information is shared across different social media platforms, and they followed recommender engines, recommendations. So they were doing all this work, and they were getting all this information, and they were labeling it with they were labeling with opinions. Opinions were so they labeled in the end 614 postings. In computer science terms, that's nothing. But for them, it took them 3 months to do it. Why? Because they were 2 of them, and they always were discussing, and they had an inter-annotator agreement of 81%. Also, the vocabulary of the annotation was emerged as they were doing their ethnographic, their deep qualitative study. So they didn't know what opinions existed out there. They discovered the opinions as they were reading the text, and they were formulating the vocabulary of the annotation as they were going. So at the end, they had 65 opinions, which included things like, United Nations is corrupt, climate change is a UN hoax. All of these are pretty well-known standard, but some of them were pretty funny. Men are being chemically emasculated by the government. You won't believe the amount of craziness in these places. But going past that. So we have a Wikibase now installation where we had postings, their opinions, and their topics. And now, I'm showing you an example of a public forum, public Facebook group called Take Australia Back, and I'm going to show you how it evolved in the time. Why am I doing this? To show you how they work, how the social scientists work. I don't claim I'm going to be doing a good job at telling you what happened here, but that's how they function. They look at postings. For example, they look at posting like this. Apparently, climate change is real. And then it has a couple of reactions where they saw in this, by looking at this forum, they saw that in January 2020, The forum was mainly 50-50 climate change denial versus support. There were respectful debates, mainly textual. There was a 40 to 60 years old user group. There was a bit of misogynistic language, but by the standards of this group, nothing extreme. And there was a little bit of conspiracy theories that were sort of vehiculated. However, by 16th of September, which is only 7, 8, 9 months later, the group has shifted quite a bit. Now you start having imagery, like for example, comparing the masks back in torture devices and the masks against COVID. You see a younger use base. You start seeing religious symbols which didn't exist earlier, and and a lot of memes. So the idea is that the group shifted as an identity. This is how they work. This is how the social scientists work. Okay. Once they done this, the next step was doing unlabeled data collection at scale. So what we did, we got a number of keywords that they provided. And then we went on the APIs, CrowdTangle for Facebook, YouTube API for YouTube and Twitter developer. And we collected every result that resulted from these keywords. We had about 13 million postings. Most of them were Facebook, a bit of Twitter, and YouTube comments. The Twitter we bought at the time from GNIP because Twitter version 2 was not yet up. So we had to buy the tweets. This is how the distribution of the postings were. Most of it, as I said, is Facebook, which was pretty consistent. Twitter was mainly concentrated during the bushfire and at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And then YouTube was a little bit in between. And now the question was, how do we actually label the entire data set? That was the question. That's what they wanted. The difficulties are, they concentrated on a very small part of the discussions. They were not representative. But we had examples. So obviously, we did what any machine learning will do, any machine learning expert will do. We said, okay, we're going to deploy textual classifiers. So what we did a 2-level of classifier. A first level was classifying the topic. We had 4 topics plus off topic. So these were a set of 4 binary classifiers. And then once it was deemed to be relating to a topic, we had a multi-class opinion classifier, which was relating to that topic. We tried, obviously, we did all the standard stuff. We tried a number of classifiers. Unsurprisingly, let me just move this so you see it. Unsurprisingly, neural networks, a neural network solution based on Roberta did the best. Again, unsurprising. So here's the gist of it. We applied a human-in-the-loop machine learning. What we wanted to be able to select new data to classify, to label by our humans. And for this, we used active learning. We used active learning with free strategies for data sampling. We have the active learning strategy, which basically picks up the examples for which the classifier is least sure of. The idea is to pick up examples around the decision boundary to make the decision better. So we picked for each topic, each iteration, 10 posts there. We also picked the post with highest confidence, where the classifier was sure of itself, just to sort of double check them, reality check them. And also to explore the space, not to get confined onto a single region of the space, we also did a random sample. That is 25 postings per topic, per iteration, a total of 100 labels per iteration. 100, because that would be the amount of time that 100 labels would be done by our social scientist friends in a couple of hours. And then we started doing this really, really quickly. We did 1 iteration per day, or even sometimes 2 iterations per day, where they would place the label data inside the wiki base. We would train the classifiers, select new data, give them the data. It was fun time, really, really fun time. What we did, we iterated until convergence, which we evaluated using cross-validation and gains on a separate test set. And I'm going to show you right now how. What you have here are the macro accuracy and the macro F1. I know nobody would look at macro accuracy in our community, but then the social scientists don't know what F1 is. So I just put both to be sure. So bear with me. Just look at the macro F1. What you have here on the gray axis is the cross-validation. Macro F1 evaluated by the algorithm itself. This tells you how confident is the algorithm in its own performances. Unsurprisingly, the algorithm always believes it does very well, right? But in red, in red, you have the accuracy of the algorithm on a separate test set, which is always kept aside. It's never seen by the algorithm. What you see is that in between the first, this is iteration 0 is without any extra labeling, is on the initial set, and then each of the iterations that took place. We see that the performance actually increases, which means that we're actually getting better. The active learning works, and it sort of converges at some point, and we see almost no improvement between iteration 6 and 7. And that's why we call it that we converged. We also see that the difference between the two, we interpret the difference between the two performances, the self-reported one and the real one, as a sign of improvement. When it stops improving, we've converged. Also in the dotted lines, I'm showing you the performance without the active learning. This is simply by randomly sampling more data. And you can see that it improves a bit, but it's not amazing. So it shows that the active learning actually does something. Also, nice thing is that the number of posts obviously increased because we label 100 posts per iteration, but also the number of opinions increased. Because as we were showing our social scientists more data, also from areas that they've not seen before, they said, oh, but there's a new opinion. Something else emerges. So we started with 65 opinions and we ended up with 71 opinions, which was also nice. Which meant that we were helping the social scientists doing their own job by automating part of the work. They were super excited. Okay. So what did we do with this? First thing we did, we have now the fully labeled data set, which is 1.7 million postings with at least one opinion, 314,000 postings with more than one opinion, and the rest of it was off topic. Most of the stuff was off topic. Surprisingly, there were a lot of posts about dogs. We didn't get it. Why? Probably the keywords were designed in such a way that we got a lot of responses about dogs. All of those were off topic. So most of our data set is actually off topic. We only have about 1.7 million relevant labeled postings. Cool. So what you see in here is the volume of postings for certain of our opinions. For example, mainstream media cannot be trusted actually got increased over time. As we went into COVID, people started questioning the relevance of mainstream media. The climate change crisis isn't real. We see a decreasing pattern. That's because we moved from bushfires, mainly related to climate change. We moved into COVID. So people only have this much spare capacity. So as you start worrying about COVID, you worry less about the environment, which explains this down slope. And you see things like United Nations want to be a global ruling government, which is constant. The reason why it's constant is that as I grew up, this was already a topic which was everywhere everywhere. So this seems to be like a topic that never changes. And then you start seeing things like Greens influence policy. The green policy are the cause of bushfires. You may remember that they actually blamed it on the Greens, saying that the Greens didn't want to do backburns. Therefore, we have now the bushfires. So this allows us to go at scale, things that our social scientists could not do. You can't do this kind of analysis with 600 labeled postings. Okay. We can start looking at the volume of opinions. So what I'm showing you here is the total volume, the total representation of a particular opinion within our data set. Couple of observations. First of all, the distribution of popularity of opinion is unsurprisingly long-tailed. As most things when humans are involved is long-tailed. You have by far mainstream media cannot be trusted as the most popular opinion, and then it decreases quickly with a rough power law distribution. They also manually labeled some of these opinions as conspiracy theory opinions. I don't remember exactly how they make the difference between the conspiracy and the other type, but now we have conspiracy theories and the others. And what we see is that during this crisis period, 4 out of the top 6 opinions were conspiracy theories. So, and I put them here in gray. The big one is that COVID-19 is a scam or a plan of the elites. Remember, this is early COVID days. So we still didn't know if it's a real thing. Is it a plan? Are they trying to chemically emasculate us? Crazy, crazy. Cool. What we did next, remember the third research question we wanted to investigate was how do these crazy opinions actually come into the narratives of the more mainstream? communities. So our hypothesis is to look at co-occurrence. So we started looking at opinion co-occurrence. Remember that we have 314,000 posts labeled with more than one opinion. So we can now start looking at co-occurrences. And we looked, first of all, and seeing the strength of relationship between opinions. We have three categories. We see the first category, which shows sort of continuous and relatively strong association between two opinions. These are opinions often used together throughout time. An example is climate change crisis isn't real. Climate change is a UN hoax. Unsurprising, they go hand in hand. You have associations that have a declining performance, so they are getting further apart. Things like Greta Thunberg should not have a platform or influence as a climate change activist. So this is against the Scandinavian climate activist Greta Thunberg. And also it should go hand in hand with misogynistic speech, right? Women and girls don't deserve a voice in the public sphere. It has declining associations, but you can see why they were used together. And finally, you do have the ones that have rising associations. So they are being used more together, like Australian bushfires and climate change are not related. And you may remember that there was the thesis that the Australian bushfires were caused by arsonists. So this is, we see increasing associations there. Okay, so what do we do with that? Because you have links between opinions, now you naturally have a graph where each opinion is a node. And there's a connection between two opinions where there's co-occurrence, and these connections actually have strands on them. But for now, let's ignore the strands and let's look at just the graph. So we did what any data scientist would do. We started building all kinds of graph measures on them. So we looked at betweenness, we looked at closeness, we looked at degree centrality, and on the bottom you have the coverage ratio from media cloud. The coverage ratio is basically the percentage of articles that cover a particular topic. So here we looked at percentage of articles in Australia that were covering our 4 topics. You see that this coverage goes from anywhere in between a couple of percent, and it goes to a top of above 25% in the peak of in January 2020, where it was the peak of the bushfires. The logic of putting these two together is to understand, have clues if the media influences in any way the usage of conspiracy speeches. And for example, we see in the terms of between the hashed area is the area where we've seen an increased coverage by the media. The hash, so what we see here is, for example, that the betweenness of the non-conspiracy opinion is actually growing, but the conspiracy opinion is dropping during this period of higher coverage. It starts indicating that maybe the media is doing something. We don't have proof in this paper. I'm doing currently another piece of work where we're looking at simulated what-if experiments using a multivariate Hawkes modeling of the entire opinion ecosystem and then applying a market share model on it. It works for some opinions, but what we definitely see is that the mainstream media has limited impact. And I'm going to be talking, ask me in the questions why, but it's linked to echo chambers and filter bubbles. People surround themselves with people that have the same thinking. So they just don't read the mainstream media. That's a different story. But this is one of the big results from a qualitative point of view. What we did in here, I'm showing you the graph of the opinion. The placing where each node is an opinion. So you might recognize climate change is a UN hoax here, and then the more weird ones. The connections is the co-occurrence links. The shape is the type of opinion, conspiracy theory being a round one, and then the diamond is all the other ones. And then you have the centrality of the opinion. So basically how much it co-occurs with other opinions with the color. What we observed is that there was a high betweenness centrality of conspiracy opinions. They were things like Australian bushfires were deliberately lit. So this is the arsonist. And then you also see things like this is the chemtrails theory. So where this takes us, it takes us to formulate the opinion that the more crazy opinions out there are being pushed in the mainstream dialogue by co-occurrence with the more acceptable opinions. So if you are if you are a crazy opinion pusher in the social media, we're not, but let's assume for a second that I want to push crazy opinion in the social media. The way to do it is to first rationalize and popularize the opinions with your audience by using them together with more acceptable opinions. So pick one accepted opinion, pick your favorite crazy opinion, and put them together and push them together in the social media over and over and over again so that people get used to it. And that's how they start accepting it. It's a hypothesis. There's follow-up work on this in the social science realm with the social science theory that my colleagues are driving, where they explore this phenomena in detail. But we stopped here, which means this brings me to the end of my presentation. So what I've been showing you today in the second part of the presentation was mainly an interdisciplinary, we put together an interdisciplinary team to solve a difficult task. The task is difficult because it requires knowledge from different disciplines, and disciplines have difficulties talking to each other. I showed you a mixed qualitative and human-in-the-loop machine learning approach to address this problem. We built a data set, which is annotated data set of problematic opinions and problematic content onto those platforms, which has been cleaned, which has been analyzed in detail, which I'm happy to share. I can't publicly share it, obviously, due to terms of service of all the platforms who don't like to be shown that they promote this type of speech online, but privately, I have no issue sharing. And we have formed a hypothesis of how fringe opinions infiltrate mainstream by co-occurrence with established opinions. It is currently just a hypothesis. There's still work that needs to be done to show that. And with that, thank you so much.
Okay, I'll just take a second. Where's the camera? Okay. Let's thank Marian for a fantastic talk. And I'll give a reason for me coming up here is that I met Marian in a workshop in Darling Harbour. And the message is that please do travel and come to face-to-face things. We have only, what, 3, 4, 5, including me, 6 people here. But hopefully in future, there will be more seminars. So we'll open the floor for Q&A. And Jojo, are you going to look at the messages or? Yeah, and so my question before I leave is that a lot of these conclusions are obvious, if I can be controversial, right? I mean, I can say that there are climate deniers and whatever. So what is the impactful thing which this system can give? That's A. And 2 is how did you do the labeling with humans? So I'll leave you to answer these questions.
So the first observation that most of this is common sense, yes, and I take that as a huge compliment. It is common. A lot of things are common sense, but we can't show them quantitatively. We typically, when we do computer science approaches, we tend to make unreasonable assumptions. And this brings me to the second part of the difference of work. How do we work? But let me finish with the first bit. The fact that we managed to deploy such a system and almost semi-automatically obtain common sense conclusions is in fact a validation in itself. These type of conclusions would not emerge by just applying your regular approaches without them making sense. So for me, it's almost like we've done all these complicated things and we got to where we expected to be, which is a validation. So the second part of the question was, so how does it contribute? Well, what it contributes, it first contributes a methodology to apply digital ethnography and qualitative approaches at scale, basically making our colleagues better, which then enables them to actually do a lot better and form better hypotheses, better theory. It's a stepping stone. We are providing large quantities of data for them to start being able to form new hypotheses and evolve their own theory, which then we can incorporate into models. So the idea is that see this not necessarily through the contribution of this work is really the collaboration and the system. And even the system, you may say, look, it's a lot of parts put nicely together. But the fact that you put them together and you make it work, that's where I think is the real contribution. Because of the second part of the question, how do you leverage working with people across domains? Now that is an entirely different presentation that I could bring. But I've been working with these colleagues for about 3 years now, and I honestly still don't understand them most of the time, which is okay. We use different words. We use the same word for different things. I remember we started working and we were working for 2 days already, for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. We met a couple of times and they start chatting to each other, say, okay, so this paper, we're going to do this. I was like, what paper? We just had a couple of coffees. What paper? By paper, they mean project. They call something a paper the day when a project is being set. But they don't call the paper a paper. They call it an article, because for them, conferences is places where they go and they talk about what they want to do. We submitted an abstract after the second month. And I couldn't understand it. What do you mean you submit an abstract after the second month? They did, and they went to a conference and they presented what they want to talk about. So the idea is being able to go over the differences. But where I see the value is cross-pollination.
What time is the session finishing? We have 2 minutes.
Yeah, we have another few minutes, so I'll stop here. There's
quickly find out more questions. There are people probably online who have questions.
Yes. Our head of school has a question here. He asked, can I ask what grand challenges we could suggest our extra students pursue in this area?
Oh, huh. There's good. There's a lot of challenges that I would think of. There's first of all, talking more interdisciplinary, that's for sure, but that's a human challenge more than a technical challenge. But I think maybe I'll go back to my roadmap, which I showed a bit earlier. Sorry for the teasing. There's a number of challenges at each of these steps. So we have data collections challenges. These platforms, they don't like to be crawled. And this can be done a bit with more regulation. And this is something I'm doing together with the Home Affairs team that I'm working. There's detection bits. Our current natural language processing approaches don't really work well for detection. And the reason for that is that they make quick connections between things which don't exist. We built a work around problematic speech, and it shows which works really well on our data set. But the moment you use the word Muslim in text, it just shoots up as being hate speech. Like that. It's just one word. So building things that actually have meaning is one of the challenges of an NLP. Anything around predicting impact, and predicting effectiveness and influence is something which is wildly unsolved. There's theory in psychology, but there's none of it is operationalizable at the moment. So how do you take and operationalize at scale? I could go on and on, but
I think we'll also talk.
Yes.
Yes, we have a couple of more questions.
I can also stay back. So if people need to run, I can stay back and take more questions, right?
Online, so we don't know.
Yes.
Yes. We have 2 questions from Mohammed Akhtar. He asks, his question is related to inauthenticate accounts, specifically bots. So how much do you see that as a problem in the spread, and how do you identify those bots? This is the first question. So I don't think they are, my experience is that they are not very useful in the propagation itself. They are useful in fooling the recommender system. So their purpose is to make something seem very popular so that the recommender system actually starts recommending to organic users. Bots are usually not influential. Their purpose is not to push message in front of eyes. Their purpose, my opinion, again, hypothesis, their purpose is to push message in front of the recommender system's eyes. This indirect link has not been explored enough. I believe it is quite problematic because otherwise they wouldn't do it. But for the influence per se and for the information diffusion point of view, they are not very influential. Yeah. The second question is related to how do you identify those? So his question is, do you think the state-of-art natural language processing methods is capable of self-interacting social bots in online social networks, or they are just paid and unwitting human contributors in fake news spread?
This is a very good question. And for that, I'd need a bit more time just to define what social bots are. Bots can vary from your RSS feeds that identify themselves as bots. They can go through hidden bots, but they still call themselves TR2578. And then you have the more stupid bots, which are, at that point, they're no longer a bot. They're being manned by humans, but one human usually mans 10,000 bots and they are dispensable. And then you have the very, very sophisticated bots that they build for years, where they infiltrate and they man them continuously, and they go and they know the neighbors and they tweet the grandma's problems, and they push a green agenda in the neighborhood. Those are the most problematic bots. Now, to the question itself, can NLP detect them? My short answer is no, because of the wide multitude of these bots. The longer answer is yes, it can be used in conjunction with other things like our kind of metadata of the bots, but also their behavior. What we see is coordination. We see that these bots do their own lives, and when a big topic comes, they all suddenly start talking about the same thing. So you suddenly see your local grandma talking about how Putin is the best thing since hot water, and out of nowhere. Why? Because it's an infiltrated agent. So we start talking past bots. We're going about infiltrated agents. So can we just NLP them out? No.
Do we have more time?
We got 2 more minutes.
Okay, let me ask you a question. So with the human in the loop, my question was a bit more on technical side. Yeah,
yep.
That was the picture that you had, someone sitting, and the ML like just data for labeling. And one of the things you said is about your model and all is that it reduces human burden and speeds up social scientists' job.
Yes.
How many people are doing that labeling, and who are these people in your case, like given effort?
For us, it was either 1 or 2. And you may remember the team here, and it was mainly Emily, who was the research assistant employed on this project. At the beginning, when they do the initial labeling, she was working together with Amelia Jones. She's the social scientist, the ethnographer, the digital ethnographer in charge. But once the procedure was done and we were all comfortable, and maybe they were comfortable that the methodology was correct, it was mainly Emily that did the later rounds of annotations.
Right. So, I mean, there are more than 200 kinds of biases in social sciences or probably whatever. So if you have 1 or 2 people labeling, that means their bias is creeping up into.
Absolutely. Yes.
Which means probably we need a large number of people trying to do the same thing.
Sure. But then the alternative to scale it up is either you get a multi-million-dollar budget and you get a lot of experts, or you go MTurk and then you go into a different set of problems where you want to have lay people do expert work. So I don't have millions of dollars, and I didn't want to introduce other. So that was why we went here. And yes, you're right. Their preconceptions, and you can see, for example, I can go and rattle about the opinions themselves. The opinions are expressing a lot of their own biases. I don't necessarily agree with all of them. They are the experts. I'm not going to complain about it. But what I'm trying to say is that, yes, their biases do exist in the data.
Right. So when you talk about dollars, you already have $1 million, but let's try getting multi-million to do the real topic.
We did this with 50K. So, and I sometimes think that the amount of work that you can put out is doesn't always scale linearly with the dollars, because there's a lot of overhead in admin. Again, a topic we can talk about later.
Yeah, sure. We can. So let's thank once again. I think let's conclude the session.
Yes, thank you very much to Adrian for the great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.